Someone around you seems quieter than usual. Maybe a slight shift in tone. A message that was a little shorter than expected. Nothing was said. Nothing was asked of you. Nobody indicated that you did anything wrong. And yet, without any explicit signal to justify it, you feel it, a specific, familiar weight settling in. The sense that you've let someone down, that you should have done something differently, that somehow the distance in that person's mood is something you caused and are now responsible for fixing. This doesn't happen with strangers. It happens with people you're closest to, the ones whose emotional state you've learned to read with unusual precision, often without realizing how attuned you've become, and often without recognizing that this attunement was never something they consciously asked of you. This pattern has a name, though it rarely gets discussed precisely. It's sometimes called emotional responsibility inference, the experience of feeling accountable for the emotional states of people around you, not because they've communicated a need or expressed a grievance, but because you've inferred one. And the inference itself, the reading of the room, the detection of a shift, has become so automatic and so fast that by the time you're consciously aware of it, the guilt is already there, as if the conclusion arrived before the reasoning. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly where this pattern comes from, why it attaches so specifically to the people you're closest to, and what it would actually take to relate to other people's emotional states without automatically absorbing responsibility for them. Stay with this until the end, because the final part explains something that most people in this pattern find both uncomfortable and genuinely freeing when they hear it clearly for the first time. Let's start with what this pattern actually is, because it's frequently misidentified. It's often described as empathy, and it does involve a real sensitivity to other people's emotional states. It's sometimes described as codependency, though that framing carries more pathological weight than is accurate in many cases. What it most precisely is, at a functional level, is an internal equation that runs something like this. If someone near me is experiencing a negative emotion, and I'm present, I am probably the cause or the solution or both. This equation isn't consciously chosen. It's learned, usually early, and it's learned in response to environments where attending carefully to someone else's emotional state was functionally necessary, either because that state was unpredictable and required anticipation, or because expressing one's own needs was unsafe or ineffective, or because care and approval were conditional in ways that required constant monitoring and adjustment to maintain. Children in these environments become extraordinarily skilled at reading emotional atmospheres. They learn to detect a shift in energy before a word is spoken. They become sensitive to tone, body language, silence, and subtle behavioral cues in ways that children in more emotionally predictable environments don't typically develop to the same degree. The skill itself is genuinely impressive. High emotional attunement, the ability to read a room accurately, to sense what someone is feeling before they say it, is a real cognitive and relational capacity. The problem isn't the attunement. The problem is the automatic conclusion that follows it, the one that was learned alongside the skill. If I can see that someone is suffering, I am responsible for doing something about it. Not because they asked, not because the suffering is even related to me, simply because I noticed it, and noticing it feels at a deeply embodied level like an obligation. And here's where the guilt becomes disproportionate in the specific way people in this pattern describe it. The guilt is proportional not to any actual harm that was done, but to the intensity of the emotional state that was detected. The quieter someone seems, the larger the guilt. The more withdrawn, the more urgent the need to repair something. Even when nothing has been communicated, even when the withdrawal may have nothing to do with you, even when asking directly would reveal that the whole inference was inaccurate. This is the mechanism that makes the guilt feel so irrational even to the person experiencing it. Somewhere, they know that nobody asked them to feel responsible. They know that the person's mood could have a dozen causes that have nothing to do with them. They know, intellectually, that they cannot and should not be accountable for every emotional fluctuation in every person they're close to. And yet the guilt lands anyway, with the specific weight and urgency of something genuinely owed. Here's the part that reframes the entire pattern, and the part most people in this experience have never heard framed this way. The guilt isn't primarily about the other person. It's about safety. In the environments where this pattern was built, the emotional states of key people were not just information. They were threat signals. A parent's shift in mood wasn't just a fact about their internal state. It was a forecast of what was coming. Being attuned to it wasn't just sensitivity, it was a survival strategy. And attending to it quickly, attempting to repair or smooth or adjust, was how the child in that environment managed risk and maintained the connection and approval that they depended on. That survival logic is now running in your adult relationships, in response to people who are not threats, in contexts that don't require that level of monitoring, in situations where no actual danger exists. The guilt isn't a moral signal telling you that you've failed someone. It's an old alarm system detecting a pattern, negative emotional state near me, action required, that was once genuinely necessary in that. Never fully updated to reflect the different conditions of your current life. Oh, what changes this? Because understanding the origin, as real and useful as that is, rarely dissolves the guilt on its own. The pattern is embodied, not just intellectual, which means updating it requires more than changing a belief. It requires changing a behavioral pattern repeatedly in real time. The first shift is learning to pause between detection and conclusion. When you notice a shift in someone's mood, the automatic sequence moves from detection to inferred cause to guilt almost instantaneously. Inserting a deliberate question into that sequence. Do I actually have evidence that this is about me? Or am I inferring? Doesn't eliminate the response, but it creates a real pause that allows for a different choice. Over time, with repetition, the pause becomes easier and the automatic leap to guilt becomes slightly less automatic. The second shift is learning to tolerate the discomfort of not fixing something you didn't cause. For people in this pattern, sitting with someone else's unresolved negative emotion without moving to address it produces a specific physical discomfort, a kind of urgency that feels almost identical to the urgency of an actual obligation. Learning to recognize that discomfort as old programming rather than a genuine moral signal, and to let it exist without acting on it, is the actual behavioral work that changes the pattern. The third shift is asking rather than inferring. Replacing the internal inference with a direct, low-pressure question. You seem a little quiet today. Is everything okay? Does two things simultaneously. It tests the inference against reality, which often reveals that it was inaccurate, providing genuine evidence that the pattern's predictions are unreliable. And it moves the responsibility for communication back to where it belongs, with the person who has the actual need, if one exists, rather than with the person who noticed a potential signal of one. Here's what ties this together. The guilt you feel when you sense you've disappointed someone who never said anything is not evidence of genuine failure. It's evidence of a very specific, very old learned equation, that other people's emotional states are your emotional responsibility to manage. That equation was built for a context that no longer exists. It applies skills that are genuinely valuable, attunement, sensitivity, awareness, toward a conclusion that was never fair. Not then and not now. Other people's feelings are information. They're not your assignment. If this explains something you carry, tell us in the comments. Whose emotional state have you spent the most energy managing? And did they ever actually ask you to? And if you want to keep uncovering the hidden mechanics behind your own emotional patterns, the next video is right there.